Good evening, everyone. I would like to call for the Marin Water Board meeting of April 30th, 2024. Terry, if we could have a roll call, please.
Good evening, Director Larry Russell. I see him present.
Here.
Thank you, sir. Director Monty Schmidt,
Here.
Vice President Matt Sampson,
Here.
and President Ranjiv Kush.
Here.
Absent is Director Jed Smith.
Okay. And then do we have a motion to adopt today's meeting agenda?
So moved. Second.
Terry, do we have any public comments on today's agenda?
There are none.
Then if we could have a roll call vote, please.
Yes, Director Russell. Director Schmidt.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Vice President Sampson
Yes.
and President Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
Our next item is public comments on items that are not on the agenda.
Yes, we do have one, Mr. Phil Sauter.
Good evening. I'm not sure when the packet went up for tomorrow's special Board of Directors meeting. The agenda was posted yesterday, 2 days in advance of the meeting. And it's the Water Efficiency Master Plan, which a lot of us have been waiting for. I didn't get to spend any time with it until today, and I see it's listed as a workshop, but I wasn't sure who the workshop is for. It's scheduled for 5 o'clock when many members of the public are at work. And there was also a 170-page attachment, including the largest spreadsheet I've ever seen. So hats off to the board for digesting all of this info and being prepared to hold a workshop on it tomorrow. But I wouldn't expect a lot of public participation in something that soon and that detailed, which is too bad because the district survey showed that 74% of customers said that water use reduction was either very important or extremely important to them. I would like to see, and maybe this is in the plan, is a future meeting that gives the public more time, easier to understand information, and you know, just more notice to be able to participate. I also noticed a statement that read, the WEMP does not propose new significant changes to the current activities and initiatives. And again, that's something I'm really looking forward to seeing new significant changes to current activities and initiatives. I think that would really help to jumpstart the outdoor water savings. So I'm hoping that there's a follow-up to tomorrow's meeting. Let's see, the one thing I really appreciated about the document is that it zeroes in on heavy outdoor water use as a key target for meaningful conservation. But I think it would be helpful if we could get the data that gives some background information on this heat map and who the super users are and where they're located and how that corresponds to our plans for increasing the Purple Pipe recycled water system. And finally, I know that Director Smith asked specifically to see this update in May, and we're meeting that bogey. But I think I'd like to see this as a starting point. I think we would really benefit from getting some more meat on the bones and having a follow-up to tomorrow's presentation. I'd like to request that we get some of the data that we've been looking for on super users and start to identify targeted programs with enough resources to make them effective and then make it easier for the public to get involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sauter. We have two more speakers, Miss Marilyn Price and then Ed Jamison. Go ahead, Miss Price.
Yes, well, as usual, I'm backing up what Bill is saying. It would be very nice to be able to get more people to attend the meeting you're having tomorrow to speak about conservation. Which, as you all know, to me, that is one of the most important things we can be doing. You know, I even think I heard maybe our president is going to declare a climate emergency. You know, y'all, we really have to move fast. The longer we wait, the more we dig ourselves into a hole. And conservation is, to me, really the way to go. I know it's so difficult because we have to change behavior, but we just have to put more effort into it is my feeling about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ed Jamison, please.
Yes,
Mr.
can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I too noticed a plan that I believe was posted this weekend saying that the ineffective gray water ordinance would be rescinded. But this afternoon, I see that tomorrow's slides suggest retaining it and adding a Las Vegas landscaping requirement as an alternative. Ineffective programs that waste ratepayers' money need to be discontinued. And the costs shown, I believe on slide 47, are grossly incorrect, incorrectly including zero maintenance costs. The board needs to be shown accurate, honest cost data for these programs. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay, then we'll move on to directors and general managers announcements. And I'll note that we will follow with board committee reports. So Matt, start with you.
Sure. Thank you. Just one tonight. And that was on Friday, the 19th. I was able to attend the North Bay Watershed Association meeting at Sonoma State. It was a good all-day event, learning more about what's going on regionally through our area. Nothing running home that I wanted to tell the district about, but a lot of good programs around job creation, job training, things like that. So it was a very well-spent day. And that's it.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Monty.
Nothing for me specifically tonight.
Larry?
Only to second Matt's statement. You and I were both there at the meeting, and I found it to be effective, especially for a inter-county communication. That's all. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. There were a lot of topics covered in the North Bay Watershed Association meeting, and too many to summarize here. But I will note, and Matt, you might have picked up on this too. There was an interesting California climate vulnerability assessment from the Department of Water Resources. So clearly they're doing a lot of analysis to understand our water future and how that's going to be impacted by climate change. And it was interesting to note that, as temperatures increase, one of the consequences, which I think we understand, is that in many instances, we're going to be seeing higher levels of rainfall. I think we know that there are going to be extremes of wet periods, extremes of dry period, but this potential correlation between higher temperatures and higher rainfalls in our area, and then less snow correspondingly in others, is, I think, it's interesting to note, and just something that I think we should keep in mind as we think about improving storage and our abilities to capture that rainfall. Okay, then moving on to board committee reports. Terry, I believe we have one committee meeting that's occurred since the last board meeting, which was our Finance and Administration Committee meeting.
I'm going to provide the update for that. Okay, so this is for the Finance and Administration Committee meeting that happened on April 25th. Staff provided an update to the committee on recruitment and the 360 Manager Review Program from the Human Resources Department. Staff also provided the committee with an update of the district's monthly financial report, and continued with an overview of the financial planning efforts related to the water supply roadmap projects. Staff also provided the committee with an overview of the board's travel expense policy and compensation policy, and both items were referred to the board to be considered for adopting at a future meeting. And lastly, the public may access this video and the documents from the April 25th FAC meeting on the district's website.
Okay, thank you, Monty. The next item on our agenda is approval of our consent calendar, which includes 3 items today. First is the approval of the minutes from our April 16th board meeting. Second is adoption of our ongoing resolution for emergency contracting for West Peak Power Pole removal services. And the last item is authorization for our general manager to recruit and hire one supervising land surveyor in the engineering division. Terry, do we have any public comments on items in our consent calendar?
There are none.
Okay, then do we have a motion to approve our consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Vice President Sampson,
Yes.
and President Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
Moving on to our regular agenda items, we'll start with item 9A, which is the Edwards Avenue Pipeline Replacement Project. Looks like we're going to be hearing from Alex and
Zach Teller.
Zach. Got it.
So good evening, directors. Alex Anaya, Engineering Director. This evening, Zach Talbot, which is our new Engineering Manager Design, will be presenting this item. Just to give a little preview a little bit, Edwards Avenue Pipeline Replacement Project is one of those unique projects that was not identified in the 2-year CIP. But on occasion, these types of pipeline replacements do come up based on jurisdictional work that it really requires the district to look at and further evaluate and bring up in prioritization. So I don't want to steal too much of Zach's thunder, so I will let him go ahead and go into details. So go ahead, Zach.
Thanks, Alex. Good evening, directors. As Alex mentioned, I'm here to present on the Edwards Avenue Pipeline Project. Recommends jointly working with the city to complete this pipeline replacement project by entering into a reimbursement agreement to complete this work. The city will continue to administer the contract, and district staff will be inspecting and managing the pipeline portion of the project. The reimbursement agreement, which can be found in attachment 1 of the report, includes the $481,794 for construction costs, a $72,000 construction contingency, and up to $3,000 for the city's legal fees, for a total not to exceed amount of $556,794. The recommended action is for the Board of Directors to authorize the general manager to execute this reimbursement agreement between the City of Sausalito and Marin Water for the Edwards Avenue Pipeline Replacement Project. Thank you. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Great, thanks, Zach. I'll open it up for director's discussion, comments, or questions. Larry, maybe we can start with you.
He's not available
Okay.
right now.
Okay, so Monty,
I've got no questions. It sounds like a really important project to get done.
thanks, Monty.
First off, Zach, congratulations on the promotion.
Thank you.
Can you just make sure I'm clear on this? How much money will the district be out of pocket for this one? Is that the total number you're given?
I would, the total budget is $671,794, and that would include materials and district staff for inspection, as well as the budget for the reimbursement agreement.
Great. Any idea how much this would have cost if we just did this without aligning with efforts in Sausalito? Rough estimate, just how much we're saving by timing this?
Yeah. So the advantage of this project is there's no repaving costs. We're just installing the pipeline because the city had already budgeted to repave the street. So there's at least a 15%, if not more, cost savings because we're not repaving afterwards.
Great. Awesome. Thank you very much for that. It was a little bit interesting, a 51-year-old pipe, but with this kind of opportunity, it's a good call. So nice work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. We have an ambitious pipeline replacement target for this year with an associated budget. In Alex, in previous meetings, you've noted that it's an effort to get there with supply shortages. Is this activity going to count towards our pipeline replacement targets? And there is budget for pipeline replacements. So
that is correct, Director Cush. So yeah, this will definitely add to increasing the resiliency throughout our system within our service area. So this will definitely count to bringing down that bad pipe, the cast iron pipe, to get it out of our system, being replaced with new seismically resilient welded steel. So this will help bring those numbers down.
Right. So good. It contributes to that pretty ambitious goal that we've set for ourselves this year.
Correct.
Okay, then. Is Larry back here?
Yes, Director Russell is back.
Larry, any comments on the Edwards Avenue pipeline replacement project?
Oh, I didn't hear it because the Zoom dropped off, so I don't know what was said, except for the very end.
Okay, well, Larry, hopefully you can catch up with the staff report. But I'll open it up then to public comments.
Yes, we do have one, Mr. Ed Jamison. Oh, actually, no, we don't. No, we don't have any speakers.
Okay, then I'll ask if we have a motion to authorize our general manager to execute a reimbursement agreement between the City of Sausalito and Marin Municipal Water District for the Edwards Avenue Pipeline Replacement Project in an amount not to exceed $556,794.
So moved.
Second.
Could we have a vote, please, Terry?
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Vice President Sampson,
Yes.
President Cush.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to item 9B, which is our spillway capacity and subsurface condition assessment. Welcome, Alicia.
Well, good evening. It's still me. So Alicia Irish, our engineering manager of planning, will be presenting this item today. We have a PowerPoint presentation for you.
Good evening, directors. Let me pull up the presentation.
Share screen on that. Yeah. All you have to just, and then go to share screen and then pull it up. There you go.
All right, we got it. Thanks for your patience. Good morning or good evening, Director. Sorry, it's been a long day. I'm here tonight to talk about the spillway capacity assessment. We'll be going over a little bit of background, then touching on the grand jury report that was published in 2023, and then going into some detail on the spillway capacity assessment and the associated condition assessments that are part of this agreement. The district owns and operates 7 dams. 6 of them are earthen, 1 is concrete, with a total capacity of just under 80,000 acre-feet. These dams were constructed between 1872 to 1979 and range in size from 350 acre-feet to over 32,000 acre-feet. In 2023, the County of Marin Civil Grand Jury published a report, Dam and Reservoir Safety, Water May Save Us, Water May Drown Us. Staff assessed the grand jury report findings and recommendations and provided an official response to the grand jury in August of 2023. The underlying premise of this report identifies concerns with climate change, atmospheric river impacts, and spillway capacities. Staff plan on utilizing a dam expert to provide support relating to a spillway capacity analysis. To be clear, according to DSOD, all of our district dams are determined safe for continued use. The district has a thorough dam safety program, and there's been no observed changes in existing conditions through our monthly observations, and no significant movement either horizontally or vertically in our regular surveying that we perform. This effort of confirming our spillway capacity is a proactive and precautionary review given projections of future atmospheric rivers. This assessment will perform a hydraulic capacity analysis of all 7 of the district spillways. It will incorporate climate change projections and use regional downscaled projections that are relevant for Northern California and Marin County, specifically over areas of Marin Waters dams. This analysis will develop design storm hydrographs, as well as developing and utilizing a HEC-RAS model. It will also assess the downstream hazard potential and perform a comprehensive hydraulic capacity assessment on all 7 of our spillways. Along with this assessment, we'll also be performing a subsurface condition assessment on our Bontempi spillway. This includes a site investigation and non-destructive testing, such as delamination surveys and crack measurements. There will also be a hydraulic assessment to determine the potential for cavitation and uplift on this spillway. This agreement also potentially includes work to continue our existing condition assessment work at Peters Dam at Kent Lake, Seeger Dam at Nicasio Lake, and Suluhuli Spillway, and involves activities such as concrete coring and under drain investigations. In summary, this spillway capacity assessment is being performed to ensure the spillways are appropriately sized for our changing climate conditions. And it also includes subsurface condition assessment for the Bontempi spillway. Staff is recommending the board to authorize the general manager to execute a professional services agreement with Black & Veatch and the amount of $926,525 with the staff requested contingency of $138,979 for a total not to exceed amount of $1,065,504 for the spillway capacity and subsurface condition assessment. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Alicia. I'll open it up for director's discussion then. Comments, questions? Matt, do you want to start us off?
The only question I have in terms of if we're able to approve this tonight, when would we be able to get the results back, estimate timeline?
This depends on the work and it also depends on the weather. So I think right now the tentative schedule is for completion in early 2025. But it is, like I said, contingent on being able to get out there and investigate the spillways and perform site assessments. The capacity work, in terms of the hydraulic, I think there's a couple different parts. So the total of the agreement is tentatively scheduled for early 2025. I believe the capacity assessment is like late 2024.
Great, thank you.
Monty?
This is really great work and appreciate the dedication to safety and being responsive to the grand jury report. I know that it's the intention there is to draw, I think, attention to dam safety as an issue that affects, frankly, all dams, especially the older they get, and especially given changing climate, where previous hydraulic analyses are no longer valid in a warming future where we have differing precipitation patterns. So a couple quick questions. So you're going to be doing an analysis that looks at what we might anticipate as a future projected maximum storm event. Can you speak to like what, for a lot of folks and just for myself, trying to understand what's, you can always predict a 500-year event, 1,000-year event, like there's something within reason that is a design standard. So I'm curious, what kind of hydrology will we be looking at?
So I believe that we'll be looking at the probable maximum flood, which has a common acronym of PMF, and it will be taking into account DSOD accepted standards as to what falls into the PMF, and it can either be a storm-induced scenario, or it can be assuming various initial conditions such as lake levels and things of that nature. There's also another component that will go into this analysis, which is more of a risk assessment. So what is the downstream hazard potential for a variety of storm scenarios, and how would that play into things, as well as the fact that our dams, some of our spillways and dams are linked together such that reaching capacity on one dam may have an effect on the downstream dams and so forth. So there's a variety of different components that I believe they're going to look at comparatively and try to provide a really risk-based model.
Okay. So like, will we be reassessing what a 100-year event is? Like, will that be an adjusted number based on modeling, or do we continue to use the same 100-year assumption? I picked that number because it often ties to flood risk and flood management and other.
Right. So this would change that number only because we'll be looking at future climate change scenarios.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think that's really important for a variety of reasons, obviously, because it's a design standard. I think it's inadequate. Anything it's a 1 in 100 chance. I mean, people play the lottery on much smaller odds, but yet we're talking about public safety and risk to infrastructure. So are we sharing in the analysis of the 100-year hydrology with other of our communities that are like our flood districts and things that are managing flood flows and other things?
We could coordinate, sharing as,
Yeah, I think that's something we can look into as we develop that information from the consultant team.
Okay. I mean, I think it's if we're going to be developing information that's new and up to date, and I think we ought to be sharing that information so that it can inform decision making by other parts of our municipal governments, and especially ones that deal with flood and public safety. And then in terms of the spillway design standards, so obviously I would assume we designed to something greater than a 100-year event, but there when you talk about the maximum probable flood, is that that doesn't tie to like a 100-year event with full reservoirs? Is there any what the analysis actually looks like? Is there a, do we look at like a 200-year event or a 300-year event, some sort of probable maximum that you know of?
You mean how the spillways were originally designed?
No, to what I assume we're going to be looking at how our spillways will hold up to a new higher level
Correct.
maximum event.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what would we be assessing?
The number?
Yeah.
I would need to get back to you on that because I don't know if we're tying the capacity analysis to a specific 100-year or 200-year storm.
Mhm.
I believe that it's more of a like statistical probabilistic analysis and looking at how our risk changes across a variety of scenarios.
Okay, great. Just a last point, which is I'm glad that we're going to get this in early, if we can, in early 2025. I understand how, not ironically, that weather has to cooperate. But as we are looking at surface storage improvements, that if there's lo and behold, it ties in that there are improvements to a spillway that might also fit with some sort of retrofitting of one of our surface storage to provide greater supply. It'd be good to be able to know that, because that might significantly shift the cost benefit.
Yeah, we'll certainly be sharing these results and as the analysis progresses with the Water Resources Department.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Monty. Larry, any comments?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Alicia, were we able to discover the original design calculations on the spillways? Monty's correct. The hydrology may change, but the hydraulics haven't changed. So assuming they did it right then, which I'm pretty confident they did, were we able to share those with Black and Veatch?
We plan to share as much data as we've been able to locate.
And were we able to locate things like that?
I'm not sure we have all of the records for all of the spillways.
Okay. Does Division of Dam Safety keep any of that stuff?
We can certainly ask because this assessment will be done in coordination with them. It is not a DFD mandated study, but we'll certainly be consulting with them as we progress along.
And how many similar studies has Black and Veatch done?
They've done this type of work for a number of different agencies, I think across the Western US.
Okay.
They've done some in California, excuse me, as well as some in Oregon and Washington.
Are you talking about dozens or less than a dozen?
No, I'm pretty certain it's in the dozens. This seems to be, with the team that we've met with Black and Veatch, this seems to be more of their bread and butter, so to speak. Something
Yeah, it's Black and Veatch. Black and Veatch. Yeah, Veatch.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, cool. Thanks. That's all I got.
Thanks, Larry. Like Monty, I'd also like to commend staff for a thoughtful and important response to the grand jury report. I'm glad that you've brought this proposal up. I'll also have some, the climate modeling aspect, as Monty noted, it parallels things that other agencies are doing. And also, we have this other now partnership with the Scripps Institute to look at, impacts of climate on our supply that may be more focused on near-term events, being able to better understand the moisture content of atmospheric rivers that may not be addressing the same questions that we're looking at here, which seem to be more longer range forecasts. But bringing these together to look for areas where there is alignment, areas of potential disagreement between these different efforts to understand our climate future, which I think is still a lot of uncertainty in this sort of analysis, obviously, right? So I'll just second Monty's request to, keep us updated on the results of the climate analysis that's part of this project. And it might be interesting at some point to be able to bring the different things we're doing with respect to modeling, climate modeling and prediction together for a dedicated discussion.
Can I add just one more thing? So I know that we looked at climate modeling as part of our water supply resiliency analysis. Are we using the same modeling assumptions as we did for that analysis? Or I mean, every year there's new model results and new estimates. And so, but I'm wondering to what extent are the assumptions we made about future hydrology that we use for our water supply resiliency, how well that will track with the new analysis.
We'll need to double check that. I can't confirm right now.
Okay. I mean, if the results are substantially different in a way that if should affect our decision making about our resiliency, we should update ourselves as well.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Great point, Monty. Just one question. What was meant by optional costs that are included in the proposed agreement?
Yeah, so some of the optional costs that are proposed in this agreement are really the continuation of some of the existing condition assessment work that we've been undergoing since 2017 at Peters Dam, Seeger Dam, and Suluhuli. And there's currently a contract that we are under for phase 2 condition assessment to perform concrete coring and under drain investigation. And we wanted to provide ourselves some insurance in the event that that work can continue this summer. It was supposed to be concluded late last year, but with the storms and the dam spilling, we had to postpone that work, and we are unsure right now if the contractor will be able to continue and fulfill the contract.
Okay, so this provides the ability to continue
Right.
if that proves favorable or possible.
Exactly.
But
Correct.
we may not in fact expend the funds.
Exactly. It's just an optional task right now.
Okay, got it. And we'll move on to public comments.
Yes, Mr. James Holmes, please.
Hello. Yes, I just wondered that the scope of work does not seem to include evaluation of the suitability for modifying these spillways. However, the next item assumes that the spillways can be modified, and starting on the spillway project can be reclassified as a short-term category project, which is great news. But I just wondered, is the reason that's not in the scope of work because there's no serious question as to the ability to modify the spillways, or is there some other reason that it's not in the scope of work? Because if there were any concern about the ability to modify the spillways, then I guess that would pose a problem for making them a short-term project.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes.
I can.
Yeah, Ben, maybe we can respond to that one.
I'll do that, President Kush. It's an interesting question, and tonight is, I suppose, the dam night because we do have 2 dam presentations, and the second one is the work that's among the many things we're looking at. It includes modification of the spillways, right, to increase the height to be able to retain more water. This effort is more focused on the existing spillways and capacities, really 2 separate things. I suppose they could converge were we to unexpectedly find an issue with one of the spillways in terms of capacity. It'll be useful that we're looking at understanding their design, and maybe, this team will have to do something, but it's kind of first things first. And they really are 2 separate intents and 2 separate efforts, even though they may converge.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, and I imagine we'll be hearing more about how these activities converge as we start to make decisions about potential spillway modifications. So then I'll ask if we have a motion to authorize our general manager to execute a professional services agreement with Black & Veatch in the amount of $926,525 with a staff requested contingency of $138,979 for a total not to exceed amount of $1,065,504 for the spillway capacity and subsurface condition assessment.
So moved.
Second.
Could we have a roll call, a vote, please, Terry?
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Vice President Sampson,
Yes.
President Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Alicia.
Yeah, thank you.
Moving on to item 9C, an update on the water supply roadmap focusing on local storage alternatives. Welcome, Paul, Xavier, and Guylaine.
Elin. Yeah.
Good to see you.
Okay, let's see if I can avoid the mistakes of my past presentation on this computer. We got it, huh? So where is the slideshow? Oh, that's the wrong one. We're in a do-over. Yeah. There's too many dams. There we go. Which one is sharing now? Okay. Wonderful. Thanks, Terry. I seem to be regressing. So good evening, Paul Sellier, Water Resources Director, and as President Kush, you've just introduced Xavier Arias with Woodard and Curran and Ghislaine Roussel with Terra GPT. That's the joint venture firm that's guiding us through this screening process for our local storage project. And so tonight we have a sort of a brief presentation on sort of the how we got to the shortlist, the proposed shortlist. But before I get into that, as you may know, the general manager Hornstein and I have been meeting with the Sulihuli landowners group kind of on a routine basis. And at our most recent meeting, which was yesterday evening with the group, we wanted to share that the group felt that we had not adequately portrayed some of the challenges that inundation of that area would experience in a dam raise out at Sulihuli. And we just wanted to share that. And of course, our ongoing efforts will do our best to make sure that we do describe those challenges properly. And of course, we may hear from a couple of those folks tonight, a lot of emotions and attachments to the area that those families have over a significant period of time. So we just wanted to share that with you this evening before we got into the presentation.
Paul, just a quick clarification. In terms of differences, what our initial inundation map was showing compared to what potentially could happen, is that the?
It was more around the sensitivity of how we describe things, you know, suggesting that the land around Sulihuli is owned by Marin Water and private landowners, when in reality, maybe more of that land is private landowners than Marin Water. So just, you know, expressing and making sure that we're sensitive to their, to their needs.
Right, and just being accurate going forward. And we'll be doing that as we describe, for example, the number of facilities that may get inundated under different scenarios. And just being sure that we do a good job capturing the impacts in a fair, objective way.
So just wanted to share that this evening. Thanks, Ben. And let's see if this works without messing up the presentation further. Apparently not.
Spacebar.
Let's just do the arrows. Okay, good. So our sort of our roadmap for this evening, no pun intended, of course, is we're just going to refresh ourselves on what's in the roadmap and project goal and criteria. Of course, we'll be describing in large part this evening kind of how we arrived at the proposed shortlist. And then we'll conclude with some next steps. So then in our roadmap, we know that this is not the only thing that we're talking about in terms of how the district is thinking about water supply for the future. First and foremost, it is increasing conservation. We heard a comment earlier in the meeting this evening about the importance of conservation. And even though it may be at the bottom of this list, that doesn't necessarily signify the importance or priority with which we're proceeding. So conservation is first and foremost in our minds. And then a number of other areas we're working on in district improvements, and we've talked to the board about those. And of course, the conveyance, the Sonoma options. And then tonight's focus will be on local storage, but we've also had discussions on desalination and recycled water as water supply options. Our focus then tonight is on local storage. And so this slide is another way of looking at the roadmap, and one that kind of emphasizes flexibility. And as we think about conservation as our base layer of water supply options, and that continues throughout the time period. And while we know we're working on electrifying Sewell-Hooley and the pump station out there and connecting Phoenix to Bontempi for our in-district improvements, and there may be other CIP improvements over time that fill in on this list and improve our water supply. We have an existing portfolio of reservoirs and water supply options, and are we using those in the most efficient way? So in this area, I think one development more recently is we were the recipient of an applied science grant from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamations for looking at ways for which we can adapt to climate change in the area of developing strategies for our water supply and how we think about bringing water in from Sonoma. And then an example on the conveyance side where we might be planning and pre-design of a project, designing it and constructing it, and then operating it for a while. At the same time, in parallel, we may be thinking about a design of, and you'll see a slide later where we talk about a small storage improvement like the Nicasio flashboards, for example, might fill in here that could go in parallel. So lots of options as this sort of builds out and fills out over time. Okay. So then just reminding us why we're here, what we're doing overall with our project goals in terms of water supply. We're trying to enhance the reliability and flexibility of our water system to improve the service to our customers. And so tonight in both local storage and in the conveyance process, we use a set of criteria to help us evaluate and sort of differentiate among projects. Tonight, though, is slightly different than from the conveyance aspects. You'll note that many of these projects, because of the criteria, when we evaluate them, they're infeasible for a couple different reasons as we go through tonight, you'll see. So the criteria, you've seen these before, and I'm just going to flip through this slide because they're repeated on the next slide here, which also has some of the questions that we were thinking about as we were trying to apply these criteria to the different projects. So in terms of, schedule and implementation, for example, just to look at one that's fairly straightforward, are there other concerns regarding the constructability or compatibility with existing land uses? And on water supply reliability and sustainability, those are the sorts of, these are not earth-shattering questions. They're just to give you an idea of how these criteria may apply. And so then I'm going to hand over the presentation for the middle portion to Guylaine to talk us through the local storage alternatives and the screening process.
Thank you, Paul. Good evening. So we looked at 12 local storage alternatives. 4 were existing reservoir enlargement, Alpine, Kent, Nicasio, and Sewell-Hooley. 3 were new construction, Devil's Gulch, Halleck, and Upper Nicasio. And we also looked at modifying the spillways by adding spillway gates. And finally, we looked at dredging. And for each of these alternatives, we assessed them against the 6 criteria that Paul described to you. And then we also developed rough order of magnitude construction cost for each of these alternatives. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to each of them and just kind of touch on the key points that led to the conclusion that we made for each of them. So first, Alpine. Alpine Reservoir meets the project goals. It can achieve actually exceed the storage that was included in the project goal. However, there was a large ancient landslide that would require careful investigation to verify that it's technically feasible. But the construction efficiency is going to be reduced by the presence of northern spotted owls. Essentially, it's going to reduce the construction to 3 months, from August to October. And that's going to have a serious impact on cost, of course. The good thing, though, is the marine water owns the land that would be inundated by the enlargement. However, the cost, the rough order of magnitude cost is very high. It's over $1 billion. For that reason, we just concluded that this alternative was not feasible. Moving on to Kent. Kent meets the project goals, 20,000 acre-feet. However, there are substantial technical challenges with the design of the dam and the spillway, which could impact cost and feasibility. You heard of that at the last meeting that we had when Bob McManus presented this. We have a curved dam, as well as probably a curved spillway to avoid the side valley there. So that's really adding a lot of challenges. And like Alpine, Kent has the issue of the northern spotted owls. So once again, we have a construction season which is reduced to 3 months, August to October. Looking at the rough order of magnitude cost, this is about $600 million. So we consider this alternative, although costly, it may be feasible. The Nicasio Reservoir enlargement, it can provide the necessary storage. It meets the project goals, and the dam raise is technically feasible. However, the measures to protect the town of Nicasio pose considerable technical challenges. The construction appears favorable. It inundates land surrounding the existing reservoir, including private land. But the cost is also very high. It's over $1 billion. So once again, we conclude that this alternative is not feasible. Soloule Reservoir, it meets the project goal. It appears technically feasible. The constructability is also favorable, but the reservoir would inundate parcels that have agricultural land, structures, they would also including residences and roads. So if this alternative were to move forward, we would evaluate measures to reduce the inundation or otherwise protect the structures. So the construction cost of this alternative is around $300 million. So this is the alternative that we consider to appear feasible. Now moving on to new reservoir. First, we have Devil's Gulch. It meets the project goal. The technical risk is relatively low. But the alternative requires the acquisition of land and the conversion of land that's currently owned by the state, by the federal government, It's within the Samuel Taylor State Park and the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. So given the fact that there are other alternatives that are viable, we think that's a fatal flaw. And for that reason, although the cost is only, I shouldn't say only, $400 million, we consider that this alternative is not feasible. Halleck is on, is to be built on Halleck Creek, which is a tributary to Nicasio Reservoir right now. It meets the project goal, but the technical risk is relatively high because the geology is unfavorable, and that could impact cost and feasibility. The construction is just generally favorable. It's an earth dam. The cost is high though. It's $750 million. So the combination of the risk and the cost, we consider this alternative not feasible. We come to a new reservoir, which is one of the alternatives that we added to the list that was in the Suiza. That's on the northwest portion of the existing Nicasio Reservoir. And you saw that last time. So the project meets the project goal. The technical risk is moderate because the geology is not that great. And the constructability is relatively favorable. But once again, the reservoir will inundate parcels with agricultural land, structures, including residences and roads. So if this alternative were to move forward, we would evaluate measures to reduce the inundation or otherwise protect the structures. The cost of this alternative is similar to Kent. It's $600 million. And we conclude that it may be feasible. Now, looking at the spillway, we have lumped them all together on this slide because they don't meet the project goal, even on their own or in combination. They don't meet the 20,000 acre feet that we were looking for this comparison. One of the interesting things is that the spillway at Nicasio, though, stands alone in terms of feasibility, flexibility, because when the dam was constructed, it was designed to allow for a spillway raise. While the other locations, Solothule, Alpine, and Kent, would require more complex systems of movable gates. So the Nicasio spillway, we could install the alternative you saw last time we presented this to you, which is 3.5 foot high flashboards, fixed gates, and essentially raise the reservoir 3.5 feet without having to modify the dam. So this alternative doesn't meet the project goals, but it's feasible and it could provide value as a short to medium term drought supply project. And again, Nicasio is particularly favorable and it's not that expensive. It's about $3 million. So that's the spillways. And then finally, the dredging. We did study Nicasio dredging, but the same conclusion would apply to the other reservoirs. We can meet the project goal, but the construction would take many years and involve many challenges. In terms of a rough order of magnitude cost for this, it's way over $1 billion. So we consider that it's not feasible. So that's kind of the summary of all the alternatives that we considered. And maybe Xavier, you could wrap up.
So I wanted to just summarize where we've been, including the information you've heard tonight.
This is presented in the same order as Ghislaine just took us through, and summarizing the color codes as well as some key metrics. I think one thing I wanted to remind you of is that when we started this, instead of the 9 projects that are listed on this table here, we actually had 7. And then there was some thinking about, you know, how this might work. So we ended up with Alpine Lake enlargement was added, and also Upper Nicasio. So you can see, first we were looking at, let's make sure that no stone is left unturned, that we have the right list of alternatives. It's as broad as can be. Now we're at the narrowing stage. And that's what this sort of summary table is helpful for, is I think you see the full range that we started with, expanded it a little bit, and then the color coding as well as those key metrics. You can kind of probably see which way it's heading with the color coding. In contrast to some other project rankings, sometimes you end up with scores and you're just taking the high scores. For the most part, the red ones here are infeasible. And Ghislaine walked us through, they're infeasible for different reasons. Cost is a big one, but not entirely. It's overwhelming technical challenges, or it's occupied by a state park. So we know a lot more now than we did several months ago, because we were able to really differentiate each of these alternatives. It's not just earthwork at a certain cost. So although you see 20 as the yield and they're all about the same, that was a baseline number, but we did get the benefit of looking very closely at actually how could each of these projects be accomplished. There's still a lot more work to do, and we're going to get to a preview of that. But I think the information we have now is a solid basis for us to decide, okay, here's where we should be narrowing our focus. So we went from 7 to 9, and we're suggesting now that we need to be narrowing it to, it looks like 3, because we have one that is clearly technically feasible, and there are important issues that need a closer look, but it's feasible. And then we have the potentially feasible ones. And cost is a big determinant of whether they will ultimately be considered feasible. And then there's one color code that doesn't belong there. So we have green, yellow, red, and then the blue one that's to signify spillway modifications look like a good project, but just not responsive to the project goal, which is really to provide, call it substantial water supply in accord with the strategic water supply assessment and the roadmap that we've embarked on. So our thinking is the district may well want to pursue those projects. They provide independent utility, regardless of the selections made on the other projects, on the larger projects. So I think we wanted to make sure that although they're not screened as being responsive to the goal, they, particularly Nicasio, stands alone as potentially a very high value project. Again, independent utility could make sense regardless of which project or any project that you might do from the list above. So that's the summary. And then I wanted to zoom in on the 3 that I mentioned as either Suluhuli is feasible and the other 2 are potentially feasible. And zooming in on, of course, cost, quite a separation between them. Otherwise, you can see important categories where you can draw some distinctions in terms of implementation. We're looking at technical risk and feasibility. Probably a bit more in common than apart when it comes to implementation, that they can be done. And we do have some facts that you've heard about inundation of private land. It applies to Suluhuli, it applies to Upper Nicasio, probably to varying degrees. So that needs to be further explored. And it depends on the precise sizing. So one of the things that we'll talk about at some point tonight is among the next steps is really looking closely at right sizing each of these projects. We did 20,000 acre feet as a baseline. It's lined up with the roadmap, but each project may be unique in terms of some of the unique trade-offs of cost, impacts, and size. So we'll be looking at that. Reliability is an area of differentiation there. Suluhuli, as it says, could well self-fill. The existing Suluhuli spills in many years. So taking advantage of that, it would frequently self-fill, and it's a reasonable destination for imported water, for Sonoma water. Upper Nicasio, not likely to self-fill, but it is a reasonable destination for imported water. And then Kent, kind of has, as in contrast to Upper Nicasio, it likely would self-fill, but is not right now slated for any stretch of receiving imported water. None of the options for moving imported water around would involve Kent. And then common to all three is that environmental remains to be analyzed. For any alternative, any of these three that moves forward needs some careful environmental study. And it's one that really can't be done on all 9. It has to, be done on a reasonable number. So our suggestion is we focus it on this list. And to revisit a slide you saw earlier, as far as how this might work, I'm going to click through quickly. These are the elements that Paul showed you just a little while ago. But when we get to storage, added a little bit of specificity here on how this might play out. As I mentioned, the spillway modifications, they look like, particularly in Nicasio, a good project worth pursuing independently. So that's indicated by this track here, that there could be planning and potentially design done on that spillway raise. And then if that still looks good, constructing it and operating it. And then in the meantime, moving forward on other elements of the water supply improvements. So in this example, conveyance, and that kind of appeared out of order. But the bottom line there is the major storage project, whether it's a new reservoir or enlarging a reservoir, that could proceed through planning and pre-design, ultimately to design and into construction. And that would happen in parallel with the much smaller project for the spillway mods. And they could potentially not so much interact as if the spillway modification moves forward, it is successful, it could result in a reduction in size that's required for the other project. So whatever benefit we get from a spillway modification, although it may have independent utility, as I mentioned, it could still be an overall benefit in terms of what you need out of the larger project. So with that, we're suggesting next steps would be, again, look at spillway modifications as a separate project or projects. And then we presented this short list that we think is worth a much closer look on the larger scale storage improvement projects. And specifically, we want to further develop and evaluate those alternatives, studying those environmental effects and the right sizing that I mentioned for each site. While we wanted to compare apples to apples using 20,000 acre feet, there may be an optimal size for each of those 3 projects. And we're open to that being potentially a different number for each of the 3. Could be informed also by the spillway project. And all that comes down to at the bottom here, we would be identifying a potentially preferred alternative for your consideration. So that's where we are tonight. I'm sure there may be some questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, Guylaine, and Xavier. And I really do appreciate the summary of next steps, because I think you've touched on a lot of the things that will come up in discussion. And so let's open it up for that. Monty, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. Thank you, guys. This is, I think when, fundamentally, this shows a level of progress and fairly quick progress, as we've identified surface storage as a potential option for increasing our water supply resiliency, and the progress that we're making, where we're getting down to a point where we're narrowing. I think a lot of folks are rightly watching the CRB study and be more and more studies, and I think this is demonstrating that these studies are winnowing down options, and this is information that maybe 30 years from now, 50 years from now, some future board will pull this information forward and say, has something changed? Will something make sense that we don't choose to pursue? So there's value now and there's value in the future. So the progress. I think that, this is, these are some interesting results that I've got a couple of questions about. I think one of them is, you use 20,000 acre feet of volume. Is it volume or is it yield?
It's 20 acre volume.
So 20,000 acre feet of volume,
Yeah.
not necessarily yield, because every
That's right.
reservoir is going to yield something different,
Different.
depending on its characteristics.
Exactly.
So I would like to see what the yield is on these reservoirs, because I think that's really what matters to us. It's not the size, it's really what it produces for us. I don't know if you've got, you happen to have a slide at the end of your other slides that shows that, but that's really important information for us. And then particularly being able to look at, because cost is such it's a foundational part of what we look at here. Being able to look at what the cost is per yield, I think, is a really important consideration, because we will always need to be cost effective in whatever pathways we pursue. So not knowing what the yield is, being able to see the cost for 20,000 acre feet, but without knowing what that yield is for the cost, I think it doesn't leave me with an ability to kind of feel like I don't feel like I know enough to make myself any sort of conclusions about what I'm seeing.
Matthew, could you clarify the distinction between volume and yield, and how that, if, in the cases where that might vary significantly?
Well, I can do that, or I know that any number of our other experts here can.
Yeah, I do think it's a good point, and I'm interested to hear the team's response as well. As I think about it, it's both the yield, but because a lot of these reservoirs have the potential to bring in imported water, there's that factor as well, right? So as we think about it, to store water, it could be the natural water from the yield, or it could be a place to park imported water too. So I think we have to think about it that way. But in terms of the question,
and I think above all, we probably just want to make sure we understand the question. So next time we discuss this, we really nail it. I think that there's a few different ways to look at yield. As the general manager just mentioned, if you can bring in imported water, that might, if you are doing that, that sort of guarantees you can use all that storage, although at a cost potentially. On the other hand, if it's something like take Kent, where you can't receive imported water, but we hope it would self-fill, then the degree to which it self-fills and thus the yield you get out of it, it sort of depends on what sort of drought happens. So if you manage to top the thing off and then you get a 1-year drought and you use all that 20,000 acre feet, well, you could say, well, it actually gave you a 20,000 acre foot yield that year. If it's a more prolonged drought and the water is being conserved throughout a 4-year drought, well, then it's 5,000 acre feet per year. So there's different ways to look at that metric. I think it comes down to what value is it providing to the system. And I think there are a couple different ways we want to slice those metrics for you when we come back. And certainly it's a critical question. It doesn't have as simple of an answer as how big is it. So we started with that.
Yeah, totally. I understand these things. And I think that what I would want to see, I mean, what you've provided is sort of like, if it was self-filling, and you were getting all of that 20,000 acre feet of volume, then in essence, your yield and your new storage volume would be almost one and the same. But we have dry years and other things where we don't get a yield all the time. So I know we have the ability to basically run through through a climate analysis and estimate standing on its own, what would its yield be? And I know that's, there's professional judgment about how that'll look, but I think you guys can do that. A separate question is, would it be tied into some other conveyance system? I think that's then the cost per yield is now driven not only by the cost of the project, but also the connected project. So we would need to, in order to compare the costs per yield, we'd need to know what that number is. So without being able to put numbers on conveyance, I would just like to see as the reservoir acts on as it stands alone. And then if there is some way to estimate the cost of a connection so that you could say that yield would, instead of being 10,000 acre feet, the yield would go to 15,000 acre feet. If you had a connection, then you can add in maybe an estimator or cost of what that connection would be, so that again, we could get a cost per acre foot yield. So I think I think we just need to understand those numbers better in order to make a good decision. So just want to put that out there. Does that answer? And there may be other facets of the yield and cost benefit that others might want to see.
Yeah, I think I'm appreciating the questions. I'm thinking about it. this is going to be a critical issue as we move forward. And for example, as we look at conveyance in addition to the combined projects, as we look at conveyance versus storage, right? We want to be able to look at apples to apples. Folks have brought up with these new higher costs and we had anticipated, does that change, for example, IPR look? So we plan to have that discussion with the board and DSAL, and we need to be able to look at yield, which is the apples to apples, dollar per acre foot, and we understand, but it is quite complicated. So we will be getting there. Tonight's a bit different, right? Tonight, it's, kind of, what we're sort of asking the board, do you kind of follow the technical discussion, of course, and understand what the team did, which is it was almost like easy in a way because so many of the options were deemed infeasible. So because of that, we didn't get to the granular comparisons because we didn't need to, right? $1.2 billion doesn't really matter what the yield is, right? So this was a core screening, but as we get into the more comparisons going forward, absolutely, we'll be diving into that.
I totally agree. I'm not saying that it really matters. It's going to change the costs on some of these. I get 1.2 billion isn't probably going to come down a whole lot, or nor is is Suluhuli likely to become such a low yield that it's that the numbers don't pan out. But I think that's a body of information that it'd be really helpful to know. I also the fact that we use 20,000 acre feet, I just want to ask for those of you who are running the analysis, did that number of volume, it's like sometimes it is like the last 10 feet of height or something like that. Was there something about choosing 20,000 acre feet that caused a particular option to just become infeasible, where if we had said 15,000 acre feet, it would have been smaller, it wouldn't have required damming off, a canyon or something else? It just, I would expect that you folks might bring that to us, but you also might have just been really constrained to exactly 20,000 acre feet, and that's how big the storage had to be. But if we had said 15,000 acre feet, would one of these options dramatically dropped in cost? I would want to know that.
Right. We did look at that, and Ghislaine and Zav can jump in as well. But for example, if you recall Alpine, we had a 5,000 acre foot option that just didn't really work because it starts impacting the toe of Bontempi Dam. And so that's where Alpine ended up being merged with Bontempi. And you saw it's a larger project storage volume there at 24,000 acre feet. And then we asked ourselves a similar question at Halleck. Is there something at Halleck? And you end up with an answer, it would cost you less, but the costs aren't linear. And then you're still left with the technical challenge at Halleck. And even then, when you look at alternatives like Upper Nicasio, even, right, as one of the other new reservoirs to compare it to, that seems superior. In terms from a constructability perspective, things like that. So we did kind of talk about it among the team, but there wasn't really scope for us to be able to do that kind of finite analysis on the wide range of projects.
Yeah, a cost per volume curve for each reservoir. I'm just it's kind of a check question. I would assume that you would still have the ability to see like, oh wow, when we went to that volume, that really did trigger a big added cost because of design location. I'll just assume you guys were paying attention to that.
Maybe Mike, if I could just jump in on this point, because Xavier, you did mention one of the next steps is right sizing.
Yeah.
And how is that related to looking at smaller volumes that, and what is the relationship?
Well, maybe I should temper your expectations. We don't expect let's say we reduce the size of a project by 10%, the cost is not likely to actually drop by 10%. Probably it'll drop by less. But there's more than cost at play here. We're looking for thresholds of impacts or constructability, whether we can, if we have a tight fit, say on fitting a spillway, does that make it fit? So there could be design issues that get resolved by slight downsizing. There could be impacts that get reduced, kind of a key elevation. And if we go below that, impacts are substantially reduced. So we'll be looking for that sort of threshold.
And I imagine, so again, measures to reduce inundation and protect structure.
That's one of the key ones that, yes.
Excuse me, if you can please use the mics. We have people on.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Thanks, Terry. Keeping us on track. Okay, I'll try to be quicker because I bet others have questions. Let's go to Suluhuli. I mean, it's by this analysis, it's looking more promising by a cost per 20,000 acre feet. Does that cost estimate capture the cost of acquiring the private lands that would be inundated?
No,
it does.
just construction cost.
Okay. I think that's a really substantial issue, obviously. I mean, I'm aside from the fact that those lands are privately owned and have deep meaning to the people who live in the area, for us to look at the cost of the facility, we have to look at the lands. If it's private land, we have to add in some sort of estimator of a cost for acquiring those lands. I don't think we can really just pay attention only to the cost of the surface of, to the actual dam face. It's very much part of the infrastructure. I know a lot of the options we've looked at are in lands that we own, so there's no costs of acquiring lands. But in a case like this, we would need to have some sort of understanding, because I wonder, putting aside the issues for the folks who do live in that area and the impacts, just even what would the cost do to that cost per yield calculation. My last question, I got two last. One is I keep asking a question about what would a raise of an existing facility do to our water rights and to our requirements to release stream flows downstream. So with Suluhuli, we have obligations right now to release from Suluhuli. If we change the amount of storage we have at that facility, are we going to be able to assume, are our calculations of yield assuming the continued same amount of release? And is that a reasonable assumption? Or would the State Water Resources Control Board require us to revisit those release requirements? Those release requirements will change our yield. I know we don't know whether if they were to change, what they would become, but answering the question just simply, would we be subject to a potential change in our release requirements, I think is something that we need to understand, so that, again, we can understand the uncertainty and the potential environmental issues that would come up with a raise. So I'd like to make sure we're coming back to that.
It's absolutely on the list.
Okay. I know it's been on the list for a while, so I want to.
It's a big list.
I would say it's part of our working theory.
Right.
It's part of your working theory that we would.
There will be discussions. There's that very simple one line that applied to the shortlisted projects of environmental work. That's part of that work that we would need to do to understand the science and the needs of the stream below Suluhuli, and discussions with Fish and Wildlife and so on and so forth. So
okay, so I'm assuming that means that what our release requirements are from Suluhuli would be subject to revision if we do a raise.
We don't know that, but
yeah, I think it's a little premature to say that we can say that with certainty at this point. So I wouldn't hesitate to pin ourselves in that direction.
I'd like to find us a time when we actually will come back and understand that, because it's just, to me, it's so foundational potentially to the yield. You could do a cost yield analysis where you just make differing assumptions about what the flow releases could be. You could, I wouldn't want to even begin to speculate that, but it has such a foundational effect upon yield and
yeah,
cost.
I think we share your concerns, and there's a big modeling effort that we would need to do on Walker Creek to understand that.
Okay. I think it'd be great to figure out when in the
Yeah.
process this would be so that we know.
I will turn on my bike and jump in on this one too, because I know we're expecting to arrive at some decisions in the summer. And Paul, it's a little scary when you say that's another big effort.
Well, so these projects that we're engaged, this type of project is not one where it's a preferred alternative and we're breaking ground in 3 months time type of thing. These are protracted projects that require detailed science and engineering studies, and they're not quick. They're not quick. So even from a preferred alternative, we can get a certain amount of information about a project, but it's really only enough to start the process for the environmental work. It's not like we have a design that we can bid. We're just getting more information needed to support that level of environmental analysis. That we
Yeah.
If I could, the other issue we're grappling with, Director Schmidt, is the timing of answering the question. And it is interesting, right? It came up early on as we were talking about storage, but we had 11 options. If we proceed with the next steps, the recommendation from, that you saw, there's 3, right? At some point there could be 1. So I guess part of what Paul's saying is it's a big lift. We didn't want to have to do it with 11. With 3, we want to begin to look at it and understand it. But the detailed analysis and the real heavy lifting on this probably does happen when we have clarity on a preferred project and we're really deep in the discussions and negotiations. I think is likely how it plays out.
I totally, I get it. And I know that it's complicated and we'd love to have all the information all at the same time and so that we could make one decision well informed. But I still, I know, when we talk about, even just the difference between Devil's Gulch and Sulahuli, those numbers are not very far apart. And again, if you add in potentially the yield and other factors and costs of private lands and so forth, I could see they could be flipping. I don't know that one way or the other, but that's where I start to, I don't know how, I know the $1.2 billion projects are probably pretty safe to take off the list. It's when we start getting down to these final 3 where it becomes, I think, more of an issue.
Wasn't necessarily a cost. I think when we were looking at that one, it's the current uses of the land.
Yeah. I'm not saying that we should inundate, our state parks. So I'm just saying that as an example, we're winnowing down, and things could flip based on additional information. The last one is can we, in terms of the yield on the spillways, I get why they don't trigger the 20,000. They never were going to, but Nicasio, stood out as like, wow, gee, look at the infrastructure that's already there. This really does seem like low hanging fruit. It would just be interesting to understand what the cost per yield, if we can even get a ballpark on those other spillway projects, because again, maybe they're not really meeting our bigger storage investigation analyses, but if they are, again, cost per yield compared to what other water supply options, if they look good, and then I'd like to know that, because that's been one that's been out there for quite some time. I'm really glad that Nicasio has risen to the surface, but I'd love to know, what the others look like as well.
Yeah, so we do plan to spin off, if you like, as a poor choice of term maybe, but to pull off the spillways onto a short-term track. So we'd be coming back to you pretty quickly with information on Nicasio, like at the conclusion of this meeting, unless we hear otherwise from the board. That would be the plan that we've kind of articulated. So
yeah, let's just, so specifically, among the next steps is the spillway assessments with, the Nicasio first, because it's so attractive, but looking at all of them in a spin-off effort. So probably it's a separate contract. Engineering probably takes it on and really gets into starting with the pre-design and understanding the Nicasio raise and moving into CEQA and talking to dam safety and just moving forward as that effort is also looking secondarily at the other noted reservoirs in terms of their spillway raises, feasibility and costs and how it would be done.
Okay, great. And do we have, just on Suluhuli, one last thing do we have an estimation of what the inundation of privately owned lands, what just the number of acres that would involve?
I recall it was around 500 acres comes to mind.
Yeah, I think but it's, it depends on enough assumptions. I'm not sure.
There might be mitigation measures that could reduce the
Right.
number of acreages. Okay, great. I will say that I know as we get now down, as we've made this kind of progress where we are winnowing down, and it's clear that Suluhuli is going to be something that we're going to look at just by the numbers, the way the analysis is looking. It really strikes me. I know that I have not been out, I'll admit, to see the potential dam site, and I want to make that effort. And whether other board members will or not, if there's more than two of us, then we need to set up a tour that's a public meeting. But it's my intention to make that effort and soon, because it's an important issue to understand. So let's put that there.
Matt? First off, thank you to the team for distilling this complex issue down for us tonight as we move forward. And I think I share probably the excitement and both the anxiety of other board members here, how we start getting closer, but then all of a sudden, things start getting more clear, and I think more real would be a appropriate term. I would like to piggyback on Monty's piece about the inundation costs and then what it costs to acquire land, not just for Suluhuli, but any of the options that we go forward with, including Nicasio's land as well, because I think it's an important component of the total overall cost for that. On the projects or the alternatives that involved protected habitat for northern spotted owl, the construction window, just to clarify, would be reduced to 3 months a year. And just rough numbers, not asking for a legitimate or a accurate or a super accurate statement, is how long do you think the construction for that dam would be with that constriction?
For Alpine
Or even for Kent? For
Kent.
Yeah. Are we talking 15 years now, 3 months a year?
5 years or so.
Okay, compared to what it would be without the restriction?
It's about a 30% adder, I think.
Okay, about 30%.
Yeah.
That's not too bad. And only 3 months a year to have?
But you can do 3 months a year. Sorry, you can do 3 months a year, but of course you do 24/7.
Understood. Okay.
Triple shift. That's how you make make up the difference a little bit.
Gotcha. Thank
But
you.
that of course adds to the cost.
Yep. No, and thank you for that clarification there too. The other one that was of interest is if we look at these as a portfolio, the last three, as opposed to just a single option, and how that would look to get to where we're at, especially if we add in the water for a potential spillway raise. So things to consider. And then lastly, and I know this is probably for a different meeting, but when we look at the cost for this, some of these reservoirs are self-filling and some are not. And if we look to an option that is self-filling, does that mean we can pull back on the conveyance projects? And does that mean we have a big cost savings to be able to pull that in? So as these start to converge, it'd be really interesting to see those numbers, how we can potentially shift money from one project or one, I guess, perspective to the other for that. So that's it, but thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Larry?
I've got quite a few questions. How much of the budget has been spent on this project so far? Because I'm afraid that we're simply been throwing good money after bad. You guys have done a great job. Cutting on an alternative off is as important as discovering the alternative. But going forward with these numbers, it's at the best pie in the sky. And as Ben mentioned correctly, there are so many other alternatives available that make far more sense than spending these kind of numbers. I mean, I question the logic of including a project that cost over $600 million as feasible. Even 300 million, you're exceeding our bonding capacity by multiples. And I just don't see the reason to go forward, very frankly. I think what you've done is interesting and it's useful, but frankly don't see spending any more money on this project at all. Yield, Monty, is not the way to look at this project. Xavier hit it right on the head. You got 20,000 acre feet. You need 20,000 acre feet for the drought. You use that 20,000 acre feet. But I don't think you should be thinking of this as a daily yield. Our demands are dropping. Why would we need more water on a daily yield basis? So I don't see useful. And I think the other part is we haven't even started talking about dollars per acre foot. The alternative of storing potable water from Sonoma in an open reservoir, to me, is just silly. You're talking about $2,000 to $2,500 an acre foot. At that point in time, we're paying $1,300 for it, and then you have to treat it at a cost of at least $700, and that doesn't include pumping costs. It's like, oh, please, or the cost of getting it to the reservoir. I don't see this as a viable pathway. The numbers just don't work out to me. And like I say, I mean, there's always wishes and hopes and things like that, but that's not how engineering moves forward. So that's how I see it. I think, like I said, you guys have done a great job. It's very interesting information, but I don't see a pathway forward to spend more money doing this. So maybe you could answer the question first about how much of the budget's been spent.
Thanks, Director Russell. I think the budget, the invoices that we paid to date, we're probably around 35% of the total budget, 40% maybe.
Yeah, well, that's reasonable for the level of effort. Like I say, I think we should start thinking about preserving the money for a more feasible work. From my viewpoint, any feeling for the dollars per acre foot? I mean, it's got to be gigantic.
The dollars per acre foot depends on so many different factors. When you look at the lifespan.
Yeah, of course.
When you look at the lifespan for a dam, you might assume 150 years. You might even assume longer. It really depends. And as you know, there are relatively minimal maintenance costs and operating costs for a dam over that period of time.
Well, Paul, let's forget about that. What's the construction cost in dollars per acre foot?
So
not yield, but total. I mean, it's 300 million for 20,000 acre feet, right?
You can do that kind of calculation, yeah, but it's not. I mean, that's interesting as a comparator, but that's not the actual cost of the water because you don't pay.
No, of course not.
Yeah,
but where I'm headed is, it seems to me that something like conservation or the more even something like desal is now in the ballpark play of these kind of numbers. And I think that we should seriously back up and say, okay, we've looked at that alternative is not going anywhere. And I think talking about things like Suluhuli is just unnecessarily riling up the folks that live there. I don't see that as a viable project. I think we've got Suluhuli, we've got what it can do, and they've already compromised their land ownership to create Suluhuli, which we appreciate. But I don't think it's wise to talk about projects that I just don't see as in any way or shape to be feasible moving forward.
Thanks, Larry. Interesting perspectives. Anything else?
Not on my end yet.
I'm sure we'll come back to this at some point, but in the meantime, I really want to thank you, Paul, Gillen, Xavier, for the analysis to date. I hope you'll continue, and I hope, we'll continue to learn more from this effort. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Oh.
And of course, I'd like to open it up for public comments.
Yes, we have 8. The first 3 speakers, Phil Sauter, Maria Gisleta, and Abe Hardin.
Thank you very much for the presentation. As you'll hear tomorrow, conservation incentives are considered to be cost-effective when they're less than the cost of purchasing water from Sonoma Water. That purchase price is currently $1,434 per acre foot, or 0.4 cents per gallon. The Sulahuly Reservoir enlargement is considered to be cost-effective with a construction cost of $291 million for an additional storage capacity of 20,000 acre feet, or 6.5 billion gallons. That means each extra gallons of storage costs 4.4 cents per gallon, or 10 times as much as if we saved the gallon through conservation. And that's just the construction cost. So I think that speaks to some of the questions that Director Russell had. Why would we want to pay 10 times more to store a gallon of water than we would to reduce the need for it in the first place? I thought I must be missing something, so I looked at it another way. If we were to increase our storage by 20,000 acre feet, we could theoretically reduce our purchases from Sonoma Water by that amount. At $1,434 per acre foot, we could reduce our expenses by $29 million. Would we spend $291 million in construction costs to achieve those savings? Plus, we'd have to spend more to treat that water than we would to treat Sonoma Water. By further inundating private land, we cause damage to current landowners and to any species who happen to call that inundated area home. It's worth remembering that raising Peters Dam to capture additional water in Kent Lake resulted in crashing the salmon population and put us on the hook for significant environmental releases each and every year. I recall that we netted only half of the expected increase in storage. Wouldn't it be easier and more cost-effective and more environmentally responsible to save that water through conservation? Or, on the other hand, if we can justify the cost of Sulahuly enlargement, couldn't we justify spending 5 or 10 times more on conservation? I appreciate the way that staff and the board have been diving deeper into the water supply alternatives, one at a time over the last few months, and part of that process has been separating the wheat from the chaff. 2 years ago, I wasn't expecting to see so many options fall by the wayside. My guess is that as other options fall away, conservation is going to emerge as a supply source that deserves more respect. And I very much appreciate Paul's supportive comments tonight. And my hope is for a greater sense of urgency going forward on the issue of conservation. Thank you.
Thank you. Maria Gisleta, please, and then Abe Hardin.
Hello, thank you, board and staff, and Phil, thank you as well. My name is Maria Gisleta. I am part of the Barboni family, 5th generation in Hicks Valley. Roughly 1.7 miles of the Sulahuly runs through our family's ranch. I am here to help represent the adjoining landowners. Over 70 people, 13 homes, over 30 agricultural buildings, 9 miles of primary access road, 530 acres of fertile pasture are directly affected by the inundation, and 5,600 acres that would be indirectly affected. If the proposed water storage were to be increased by the 39 feet that has been proposed. The bump in storage results in a catastrophic blow to my family and friends. The stark realization that the loss of opportunity for the future generation should that single green column on your staff report trigger the inundation. That land has sculpted who we are. Our history carved out piece by piece for over 100 years. Our blood, sweat, and tears are soaked in that soil. We appreciate the magnitude in determining the feasibility of all these potential projects. I understand the overwhelming and lengthy process to collect all the data, let alone present it for scrutiny. We have been expressing our concerns for the past 2 years. Board members have visited us on site and Zoom meetings have been held. We did not want to be blindsided like the ranchers of Nicasio when receiving a letter in October of 1957 stating that they had 2 years to get off their land. Many of us are frustrated, fearful, angry. Honestly, emotions run the gamut. I sat across from my husband last night after the Zoom meeting with Ben and Paul, and I had no words, and I never have no words. There he was, Potter Valley raised, chewing on the concept that his home ranch and community is going to be devastated with the deconstruction of Lake Pillsbury Scotts Dam. While at the same time, he tries his best to support me when our home ranch is on the chopping block. Flood one and dry the other, the odds are astonishing. It has been discussed many times that rainfall has become increasingly inconsistent in the past years, and the Sulahuly's capacity is completely dependent on the runoff of the surrounding 12,000-acre watershed. Even if you backfeed from Cotati, keeping her at crest height at 30,000 acre feet will be challenging with the continuation of uncertain winter storms, the significant operating costs to convey that water up and over to Nicasio. In October of 2021, I walked the dry bottom of the Sula. The drought was in full swing, and it was the first time that MMWD had drawn from the reservoir in my lifetime. Where typically I saw water, soil had dried, cracked, and created a million pillars. It took me 3.5 miles to see water again. Even with your best efforts to keep her full, the vast amount of area you propose to flood on the east side will be very shallow waters. With those shallow waters with receding, which she will by nature every year almost, you will see the skeletons of our homes, the remnants of our dedication, and the extinction of 100+ years of Marin County agriculture. That is what is beneath the water of the Sula Hula, and that is what will remain. Hundreds of acres of arid plain in the middle of what we once called home, and it breaks my heart. Thank you.
After Abe Hardin is Elaine Dulcini and then Carol.
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to speak before you this evening. My name is Abe Hardin, and I'm a member of the Sula Hula community. It is my understanding that Sula Hula has been lightly utilized for over the past 50 years because of the issues accessing the water. The reservoir has been essentially backup storage. If this is the case, the building of the new pump station will effectively increase the water supply. The district will gain regular access to 10,000+ acre feet of water. Having worked in the capital projects world, I understand the attraction and excitement of building something. But thinking as a ratepayer, how will the debt service on what is certain to be a $400 million project be paid? The actual cost to ratepayers for such a large capital project should be made public sooner rather than later. When considering inundation, there must also be serious thought given to the local economic consequences. The inundation would cripple active businesses, which employ people, support a wide variety of vendors who perform work there, and contribute to the county economy by producing products. It is unfortunately more comfortable to look at a map and see the number of houses, barns, and outbuildings and roads, and forget that these all support actual businesses on the land. Finally, I wish to say that over 45 years ago, MMWD came to the Sula Hula community with a proposal to build Sula Hula Reservoir. That process resulted in the creation of a reservoir and the inundation of viable agricultural land. The community worked with MMWD and the project was successful. Now you're coming again to a community that has already contributed substantially to the storage needs of the county. You are requesting additional sacrifices from people who have already sacrificed. I urge you to pursue solutions that allow the Sula Hula Reservoir to remain at its current level. And just as an addendum, I hope you will listen to Director Russell on Sula Hula. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you, board members, staff members, for your time and the opportunity for me to speak. I guess my stance, I am a Sula Hula, part of the ranchers that live on the border of Sula Hula, and I am opposed to the augmentation, obviously. And I wanted to make sure that we had apples to apples comparisons. It came to my mind yesterday and times before that we do have spotted owl on our property. There have been biological assessments that have determined that the bird is also on the forests that border the Sula Hula Reservoir. I think that needs to be brought into consideration. I've made some phone calls today to make sure I can get the documents for that. I also wanted to say, considering lots of nesting sites there, there's a lot of different raptors that have nesting sites on the property, bald eagle. We have the osprey. Those I'm just thinking of the birds that'll be around the reservoir. It's been said before tonight that the cost doesn't include the mitigation costs. And I just want to make sure, I just want to put it in there, another plug for that, making sure that the cost of Sula Hula, although it looks pretty good on the chart, that it doesn't include some very important and probably costly details that haven't, there's a few blind spots that need to be included. And I just appreciate that you gave me this opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Carol Dosini, and then after Ms. Dosini is Ed Jameson and Barbara Reedy.
Directors, staff, and people of Marin. I'm glad to have this chance to speak with you tonight. I am a member of the neighboring West Marin community that borders on the Sulihuli Reservoir. I've been attending and commenting at these meetings via Zoom for some time. I am speaking in person this evening because we are nearing a point in the strategic water supply process where the decisions made about the Sulihuli Reservoir become potentially very destructive and personally impactful. First, I'd like to point out that our community and MMWD share common ground. We are all dedicated to stewardship of the land. MMWD is well known and respected for its responsible stewardship of their watershed. Likewise, we in West Marin comprise a sizable, organized, multi-generational community of dedicated land stewards. We have protected and preserved the beautiful hills and flatlands of West Marin for over a century. As a group, we are a valuable partner with MMWD in preserving natural habitats that support biodiversity and a healthy watershed. We also support the responsible and fair development and use of the Sulihuli Reservoir. Our most pressing concern tonight is in seeing that Sulihuli's flood print does not increase to the levels projected in plans to increase the dam by 39 feet. The West Marin community, which borders on the reservoir, represents people, families, businesses, homes, roads, lives. When you consider the relative cost of this project, please know that by raising the Sulihuli Dam by 39 feet, you will cause us irreparable loss. This is a cost which was not included in tonight's documentation, but this cost is equally as valid as costs for construction. The people of Marin need a reliable and resilient and affordable water supply that can withstand extended drought. MMWD should be able to achieve this without destroying neighboring communities. We urge the board and staff of MMWD to work with us as responsible stewards of the Sulihuli watershed. We appeal to you as your longtime neighbors to remove the option of raising the Sulihuli Dam as a preferred alternative. Please do not continue to push this destructive plan forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Ed Jameson, please, and then Barbara Reedy.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, this was another outstanding presentation by district staff and its consultants. On the Phoenix Lake connection, we need an estimated cost per acre foot. This offers a trivial potential amount of water, and I would be surprised if it's worth spending $5 million on it. As for enlarging reservoirs, I can't see spending $600 million or more to get what could give us only 4,000 acre feet per year in drought. And it's not 5,000 acre feet because of evaporation, which would only be about 10% of our drought needs. This trivial amount of water would just not be helpful. If Sulihuli could somehow be integrated with Sonoma winter water with maybe another $100 to $200 million for pipelines, maybe there's a path forward there. But we likely don't have the bonding capacity for such a scheme. And we're still only talking an insignificant percentage of our drought needs, like only 10% of what we need. And I am skeptical that in a 3 or 4 year drought, there would be excess winter water to take. In mid-2021, Sonoma said we could only have 4,000 acre feet and only 3,500 acre feet the next year. I'm skeptical that in an extended drought, there would be winter water for us to take. The 1976 to 77 drought might have winter water data that may or may not be useful, but we do not have data on a 4 year drought. So uphill pumping of Sonoma water that may or may not exist appears to be at best very speculative. As for winter water rights, or as for water rights that may be affected by raising reservoirs, we've been talking around this critical question for over a year now. And it's important enough in vetting these projects that we need some preliminary answers here. Surely we can be discussing this with state people. In conclusion, I believe Director Russell cut to the quick. None of these projects make sense. and no more should be spent evaluating them. And as he suggested, desal looks cheap. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Barbara Reedy and then Mr. Larry Menikis.
Well, I will keep my comments short, as my siblings have said many of the things that I wish to say. I am also a member of the Suli-Huli community. My point tonight was to try and reframe the way of thinking around Suli-Huli, and it is a slightly congratulatory statement that I have for y'all. The electrification of the pumping at Suli-Huli is maybe the most brilliant thing that has been done in the 40 years of its existence. In a weird way, and I said this last night to the gentleman that we met with, in a weird way, Suli-Huli has actually been a phantom in the Marin County water supply. It has been 10,000 acre feet on paper only. And suddenly, as soon as you get this electrified, you have in essence built a brand new reservoir without flooding anyone any further. Suddenly you have 10,000 actual acre feet of water that you can use whenever Marin needs it. So that's my point. My point is Suli-Huli just went from a phantom to an actual lake. Do you really need to raise it? You just gained 10,000 acre feet. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Reedy. Mr. Larry Menikis and then Marilyn Price.
Well, as we've witnessed this process unfolding, what we're seeing tonight, there's no real surprises. We've always known that there's a tremendous amount of sensitivity around Suli-Huli. We've always known that it would present itself as a viable option. It's good to see that we've reduced this to 3 options. To Larry Russell's point, he's correct. I was wondering, where will the money come from? Particularly when you consider the vast needs the district has in just maintenance and upkeep of its current facilities. So the question really comes down to these projects: are federal dollars going to be available so that a project of some sort can be viable? Because the way they stand now, it seems that it's going to be tremendously challenging to take anything forward. And I just want to say, I really appreciate the passion and the sensitivity that the speakers presented tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Marilyn Price, please.
Yeah, well, thank you for letting me speak again. I just want to say, I also want to thank the mention that conservation is first and foremost in the mind of the board and the staff. And I just wonder, listening to all the details of these expansion projects, if a similar amount of analysis has gone into, and I say really a similar amount has gone into studying what we can accomplish with conservation. And when I say that, I mean using the most sophisticated, newest measures that people are using around the country and around the world to save water, which, if we do that savings, we're just so much ahead for the future. We're not harming the people that are concerned now, or the animals that would be concerned if they knew what to be concerned about. And so I just, wonder and hope that a similar analysis before decisions are made can go into a really inclusive analysis of what conservation can accomplish. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Price. And Mr. James Holmes, please.
James Holmes, Larkspur. Expanding local storage should be job one in securing an adequate water supply, as it has been throughout this district's long history. It's immensely encouraging that you are addressing this issue directly, and you're focusing on the most promising options and the daunting contingencies. Please continue to do this, as well as pursuing the spillway projects. We just cannot go back to a situation where we're relying on conservation, which one of your consultants called sponge squeezing, and where we were recommending Las Vegas style landscaping. Additionally, in order for this to work, we need very quickly to have our legislators, and especially our super powerful majority leader state senator and the governor, to make clear that more storage does not mean more releases. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay, well, I think we appreciate everybody's important feedback on this difficult topic.
President Kush, if I could.
Yes,
just
Paul.
Seeking just a number of comments tonight and recognizing this is obviously a very challenging topic. Just clarifications as we go forward with next steps. The team will be coming back to you with information on spillways as short-term projects, right? Particularly focusing initially on Nicasio. And then we do have the proposed shortlist, which I think is worth us pursuing and refining those numbers to answer some of those questions that the board has posed tonight and that we've heard from others. And then just addressing generally the comments that we've heard, and they're all valid, of course, regarding the large dollar value of these projects. Just noting Los Vaqueros over in the East Bay is undergoing an expansion for which approximately 50% of the cost of that project is grant funded. I'm not saying that we can bank on that, but the only way for us to even attempt to get to that is to continue this process of kind of following the science and developing these projects the best we can. So we're not there yet, in my estimation, and I'm just seeking that kind of clarification that those are the actions we'll be taking.
Yeah, if I could just add a bit, right, we developed a plan and with Conveyance, we shortlisted and moved the shortlist forward for more detailed analysis, which is underway. And similarly, our plans are to do the same with storage. It really would allow us to understand much of what was raised today and begin to be able to look at this as apples to apples. These are so big and complex projects. I think the discussion tonight is not surprising. I think there's much more that we're going to have, very, very difficult discussions. I think as we continue with the analysis of these, we will, in the near term, be coming back and reviewing the funding as we did last time, but more so, as I noted earlier, looking at the other alternatives, looking again at recycling, looking again at desal in the intervening time as we're proceeding with the work on this, as well as, beginning to look at, releases and what that means. I mean, there's just so much work that I would feel. The other thing, I thought there was a really nice comment tonight that resonated with me in terms of the value of this work for the future. And even if the board at some point were to say, we don't want to pursue a large storage project, we don't know in 10 years or 15 years, a different board, and to complete this analysis, I think would advance that for the future. And probably, my point, I don't think it's wasted effort or wasted money or resources to finish this next step as we've talked about and proceed. And that's really the current staff intent. So the staff report isn't asking the board for a decision, but we want to just let the board know, remind you of the next steps and where we plan to go.
Yeah, thanks. I'm guessing there's some responses to that. So Matt,
Yeah,
you
I'll
want to
jump in
start?
first. I think I just think we're way too early in the process to pull out of what we're doing. I think it would be irresponsible. I think the team has put in a lot of time and energy to get us to this point where we're at. And at some point, there'll be more difficult decisions or more news we don't want to hear. But I think for right now, I get a little confused because in 2021, there was $100 million pipeline being authorized. And now we're sitting here saying, man, everything's expensive. And I lead from the point of, I hate to break people's bubbles, but every public project in the Bay Area is a sticker shock project. And not to say I want to fund a boondoggle or anything like that, but I just think that these numbers right now are way too early to even consider as honed in with all the unknowns as well as potential other funding sources. So I'm excited to see this continue moving forward. I'm very appreciative of where we're at right now with these three. And so I don't see any reason why not to.
Monty?
I don't disagree that I would like to see us move forward, if only to get these analyses to a place where we can get the value of the work that's been done thus far. I do think that that Director Russell has really, I think raised a very fair point, which is we're 35% of our budget into this project. And there may be a point where, for the time being, for the current need, for our current given against the other options that we have scoped out, that this is not worth going all the way forward. I don't know what that point in time is myself, and maybe every director's got a different opinion about that. But I do think we are at a point where we need to, the next time we come back to this, we really do need to start looking at the cost per yield in some fashion. I know we won't know everything, but we're smart enough to come up with some bounded estimates so that we can start to see whether this is still on the table for the time being, again, against our other options. I feel like we're getting close to that, and we have kind of a responsibility to make tough decisions if this is not cost effective for us, so that we can focus our time and energy on the options that are cost effective and could provide us just as much yield as a surface water storage option.
Thanks, Monty. Yeah, I always think back to the fact that the last significant water supply infrastructure that we have was built maybe 50 years ago. A lot of what supports us here and today in Marin was built over 100 years ago. Those were investments, those were challenges that were taken on by our predecessors in this county. And I ask, what are we going to leave for people that are going to be here 100 years from now? If we don't have the I think, courage to explore really difficult, challenging, expensive questions. So I feel very strongly that we should continue this analysis until we have all of the data on the table, including impacts on community members, including price tags, including the possibilities of external funding, so that we can make decisions that are defensible, not emotional, and not well-founded. So I also believe it would be very irresponsible to stop this process at this stage. And I am encouraged that staff is not going to consider that option.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Are you going
Gila.
to call on me? Are you going to call on me?
Sorry, Larry. I always forget something.
Okay. Well, understand that I do this for a living. I advise water districts 10 times, 100 times the size of ours. And when you see a dead horse, it's a dead horse. I completely disagree with you guys' assessment. The intellectual curiosity does not produce value. It's an interesting question, perhaps, but it's not aimed at a target. And I think that we have to have a serious meeting soon of discussing what's really feasible. If you take the number of maybe we can swing 250 million, if you go back to Brett's analysis, none of the projects are that small. And they require a lot more work than that to get them to where they need to be. As I said, a pie in the sky is pie in the sky. It's nice to wish and hope. I get paid a lot of money
for bringing reality to questions. And it's basically what our whole consulting business is about. And I've been doing it for 45 years and I continue to do it. And you have to look at this cold-heartedly from a pure engineering feasibility standpoint. And, you know, there's just better places to spend the money. It's as simple as that, to my mind.
Thanks for those last words, Larry. I think we can now adjourn this discussion item. Thanks again, everybody. We'll move on then to item number 10 on our agenda, which is future board and committee meetings and upcoming agenda items. I do have a request in this case, and I know I'll need a second for this, but I would like to ask staff if we could have a summary of all of the various groups and associations that the district is currently a member of, including any dues or contributions that we pay to these groups, and where possible, some evaluation or analysis of the benefits and returns that we accrue from all of these different partnerships and collaborations.
So I understand what you're looking for. The district does, we are members of a number of associations, industry associations. We also support in different ways a lot of, I suppose, kind of nonprofits. Within that would be like Water Education Foundation, that sort of thing. And then we also make some contributions to local community events. So you're looking to pull all that together so the board can see that and understand who we're supporting and who we aren't.
Exactly. Just because I think many of us don't have the full familiarity with that long list of partnerships and collaborations.
That makes sense. We can,
you know, guys, this is not agendized.
Larry, under future board and committee meetings, we're allowed to request topics as board members as long as we have a second, and that's what I'm doing here.
Okay. It's still not agendized.
It is the correct location to request future agenda items.
Okay.
Seems like a
We've
good.
never done it that way before that I'm aware of.
And there have probably been various locations on the agenda where that's happened, but I think we were trying to focus in on a specific location where it made most sense. And I pointed out some changes to the agenda to accommodate, but it could have happened potentially at the beginning. I think it is in the board handbook that with a first and a second, board members are able to request future agenda items. That's not new. It's the location on the agenda may be a little bit different. That's all.
It seems like a good informational practice. So I'll go ahead and first then.
And then if we need a second, I'll support that as well.
Okay, then I will.
Sorry, you're all done?
Yeah.
Okay. I just would like to tag on. I think we touched on it quite a bit tonight, and that was the acceleration of the spillway gates at Nicasio, moving that forward. So it sounds like that's going to be a plan to agendize. So I'll go ahead and shelve that one. The second one I'd like to, off topic, would be a review of our watershed fines for illegal activity, specifically associated around bikes. So we have the opportunity to take a look at what we're currently now charging for an infraction for illegal behavior on the watershed. So we have a better idea of understanding what's going on there.
Yeah, I'll second that request. Okay, then we'll move on to the next item, which is a closed session to review 3 liability claims. Before we convene to closed session, do we have any public comments on our closed session items?
Not on the closed sessions.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Our closed session was adjourned at 9:14 p.m. with no actionable items to report. And with that, we will adjourn our Marin Water Directors Board meeting. Thank you.